copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, copy. Deja vu.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows and movies that were later rebooted. For season 1, we're discussing The Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 35, titled The Mighty Casey. I feel like I always surprise you when I introduce myself.
Who are you? Wait, what is this I'm on?
And The Mighty Casey was directed by Alvin Ganzer and Robert Parrish. It was written by Rod Serling, and it stars Rod Serling, Jack Warden, and Abraham Sofair.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance.
Suddenly up ahead.
Just cross over. You're moving into another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Here's Serling's opening voiceover for The Mighty Casey. And this is, because I guess it's relevant, this is over a picture of an empty stadium. What you're looking at is a ghost, once alive but now deceased. Once upon a time, it was a baseball stadium that housed a major league ball club known as the Hoboken Zephyrs. Now it houses nothing but memories and a wind that stirs in the high grass of what was once an outfield, a wind that sometimes bears a faint, ghostly resemblance to the roar of a crowd that once sat here. We're back in time now, when the Hoboken Zephyrs were still a part of the National League, and this mausoleum of memories was an honest-to-Pete stadium. But since this is strictly a story of make-believe, it has to start this way. Once upon a time, in Hoboken, New Jersey, it was tryout day. Though he's not yet on the field, you're about to meet a most unusual fellow, a left-handed pitcher named Casey.
These last few opening narrations have been exceptionally long. Serling's broken in and out of certain areas where the character gets, like Mr. Beavis, the character gets introduced and he goes back and forth, or like reintroduces him or says more stuff about him. I feel like these last few opening narrations have been very long.
And there was a very weird, I like almost, and they have long sentences too, because I almost like ran out of breath on one.
Right, yeah.
This is very weird when he says, because this is make-believe, it has to start this way. Once upon a time, like, aren't all these make-believe? Like, why this one do you have to, like, even in the world of the Twilight Zone, this is make-believe?
Yeah.
I don't know. That was a very weird thing.
Our IMDb description is: a down-and-out baseball team's fortunes are lifted by a mysterious but seemingly unbeatable young player. That's a good summary of it.
Except for the fact that he's not mysterious. Like, within the first 20 seconds we meet him, they explain he's a robot.
Very true.
Like, there's like, it's not a surprise.
Well, I guess he was still mysterious to the other. We know that reality, but no one else in the league seems to know that reality.
I was, well, I guess this is jumping ahead to the plot, but I was very curious about whether the other players knew, because definitely there's a point later in the episode where it seems they were all aware he was a robot and what was happening, but I wasn't clear when they found that out.
I assume when he started sparking and smoking in the showers. Did you recognize our main character, Jack Warden?
So
Or the manager,
did.
I guess.
Yeah, Mouth McGarry is his name.
Yeah, which was great.
I did recognize him, and of course, having a terrible memory, I couldn't place him. And as I looked him up, I'm like, oh, from While You Were Sleeping and All the President's Men, which I think is what I knew him from. And I was scrolling down, like, oh, and from The Lonely.
Yeah. Yes, we definitely recognized him in The Lonely from that other stuff. But then when I saw him back, I'm like, oh, the guy from The Lonely is back. And in another episode about him with a humanoid, sort of android looking, replacing a function of what a human would do. Not in as bad of a context.
In the episode's defense, this time it wasn't a sex bot,
right.
And also nobody shot the robot in the face.
In fact, they did the opposite. They gave the robot a heart.
Ah.
So, okay. this is a ridiculous, silly episode, and another one that it felt a little bit Twilight Zone-y, but definitely was a silly episode.
It was a comedy.
Yes,
this was a comedy episode.
Totally.
I mean, they use cartoon sound effects and stuff.
Totally.
throughout.
I was so braced for the worst, though. I ended up hating this so much less than I otherwise probably would have. And also, I am a huge baseball fan. So, like, it was a silly baseball comedy that just happened to be the penultimate episode of season 1 of the Twilight Zone, which was very weird. Don't get me wrong. And there were also some very good baseball lines in this. Whenever there's a major league, I think I'll put it above The Natural. I'll put it above Field of Dreams. I think Major League is my favorite baseball movie because it has the best baseball lines and ones that we would take as high school kids and use on the field. And this had some very good baseball lines too.
You know, you raised an interesting point there. So we were, if you've been listening to the podcast regularly, The Mighty Casey has come up multiple times.
Yeah.
As just something that shows up on lists of like the worst Twilight Zone episodes ever. So we were certainly prepped to not like, I will agree. Like, look, this was cheesy. This was not a good episode. But I was prepared for something so abysmally terrible because some of these lists that have The Mighty Casey don't have like The Fever or The Chaser on them. And so like Mike, I think I hated this much less because I was prepared for it to be so bad and like, oh, it's just mildly awful instead of like the worst episode of television ever made, which I had kind of been led to believe. The interesting question for me would be, which we can't know, but how would we have viewed this or rated it if we came in blind, knowing nothing about it, as we have with many of these other episodes? And I think you're probably right. I probably would have liked it less because I would have, instead of having my expectations low, my expectations would have been at their average point. It would have come in much worse. It's almost the opposite of what we were talking about on our previous episode, where we'd seen several bad episodes in a row, and then one comes on and it's good. And I actually had to stop and think like, wait, is this actually good? Or am I just so happy to see something that's not terrible?
Well, and I'm just going to flat out though say too, I don't think I would have hated The Last Jedi if it was just a sci-fi movie, but it's a Star Wars movie. So I hated it as a Star Wars movie. I think if this was, I agree with the critics, this is abysmal for a Twilight Zone episode. I just don't think it's that, I think it was an entertaining, it wasn't great regardless, but in the context, in the wrapper of the Twilight Zone, this was terrible because it wasn't even very Twilight Zone-y. Like you said, it was a comedy stuck in the Twilight Zone. So in that context, I get why it's always on like the top 10 worst episodes or whatever. I totally get it. But I think just taken outside of that context, and maybe we shouldn't take it outside of that context, that sort of colors the perception of how good this episode is, because for sure, I agree, it is not good as a Twilight Zone episode.
Well, I would also say, like, look, context always matters. If somebody, if one of my students turned this in, I'd be like, wow, for, first semester filmmaker, this is fantastic, right? Like, on the other hand, if I paid $15 to go see this in IMAX, I would have been demanding, like, the context does make a difference. So it matters that it's supposed to be a Twilight Zone. I don't think even in another normal sort of, meaning like another broadcast television series context, I don't think this was ever going to be good. It's very after school special, like pitched at the intelligence level of, like a kid and the thoughtfulness of that.
I agree.
Whereas, and I get this is putting it back in the Twilight Zone context, but one of the best things about the Twilight Zone is some of these good episodes and even some of the bad ones really give you stuff to chew on. I mean, The Lonely, which we had some disagreements on the overall quality of, that raised a lot of really interesting, provocative questions.
Definitely.
And the twist here that when he gets a heart, like now he likes everybody and he can't be mean, like there's no thought process or depth or anything to it. It's just like, okay, heart equals now you love everybody.
Totally agree. And I'm not trying to defend this episode. I think I probably liked it a little bit better.
You are totally defending this episode. Stop it.
It was I expected way worse than what it actually was, at least.
Agreed.
Before I go too far away from there being some great baseball lines in here, I want to just call out my favorite one early on. One of the guys goes, "When the Hoboken Zephyrs win one game, we have to call it a win streak." And I thought that was such a great baseball line. There were some other ones for sure in there, but there was some...
Okay, so from that same conversation, can I throw out the two other lines that I wrote? Because I agree with you. There's some great baseball lines in here. Actually, I take it back. I'm gonna have to throw out three, because there was that conversation was just so chock full. And it's between McGarry, the manager, and the GM who acquires the players.
That's why I only typed one, because I didn't have time, because they were stacked up on top of each other.
Yeah, and they have this nice little argument about like whose job it is to get good players, because they're But so one from the GM says, "When contract time comes around, you don't have to."
Yes. Yeah, there were really cool, funny baseball lines.
There was some well-written comedy.
Yes.
If this would have been like a baseball comedy, like more like a Major League or a Bad News Bear, I don't mean to equate those two, but like no weird Twilight Zone, anything, just it's a comedy. Like there was some good writing. Then two others from McGarry. One is the GM asked about this other pitcher. He says he pitched one inning last week and only gave up 6 runs. That makes him our most valuable player.
Yes, that's right.
And then the other one, like, where they get a call about a pitcher, like, do you know anything about him? If he's got more than one arm and less than 4, he's for us.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and it's fun. Now that you're saying this, Mark, maybe I'm realizing why I'm giving this a little bit more leeway, because unquestionably, this is the funniest episode of The Twilight Zone that we've seen.
And Walden is really good in it.
I love him.
He just sinks his teeth into the cheesiness of the whole situation and like chews the scenery in a great way.
Yeah. So maybe, I mean, that is my background as comedy. So maybe that's why I'm giving this a little bit more leeway, because there were legit funny moments, and I don't laugh out loud at a ton of stuff, even when I recognize it as funny, but there were a couple of snorts that it got out of me that was being so silly or like those baseball lines.
No, I think you raised a really good point about the context of it being the Twilight Zone mattering, because there are, I'm in the same way. Like, it's hard to think of another Twilight Zone episode where I've legitimately laughed, other than maybe The Fever, where I laughed that they were trying to be serious. I'm not even kidding. I was like laughing like, really? This is what's happening?
I think there were some good lines
there was legitimate comedy here.
Yeah.
The problem was it didn't at all fit with what you expect or want out of the Twilight Zone, and the comedy was not enough to carry the rest of the dead weight.
Sure. I do think in Time Enough at Last, we both agreed that the bank managers had some pretty, I don't know about laugh out loud funny lines, but in the context of that, he had some pretty funny lines too. So
did you like, while we're on funny lines, just McGarry's, when he figured, he knows that, I'm just going to say figures out, but the doctor who built the robot is like, oh, I built him, he's a robot. Like, and McGarry sees he can pitch, and he's like, okay, we're going to keep this between us. Don't ever say the word ROBBOTT.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there were some really funny moments in it. And
it reminded me of Dr. Zoidberg in Futurama when he always calls Bender Robot.
Robot. And also, like, even when they're watching the robot, watching him throw, and they're like, all right, throw the slow ball. And instead of having to show it, actually, they just show like their reaction, like their heads tracking it super slowly moving in. I thought it was kind of neat.
And it's like in the air for like 10 seconds.
Yeah. And like when they throw the curveball, their like heads are spinning around trying to track the flight of it. And
they have the great, sorry, while you're on that, they have the catcher, they show the catcher behind the plate, like literally like moving like 3 feet to one side,
yeah,
then back to the other, then back. Yeah.
And the catcher
also taking like 10 seconds for the ball to get there.
Yeah. And also the when he throws his fastball, the catcher has this smoking catcher's mitt, which is just classic, which reminded me of The Rookie, which we've brought up on this podcast before, that he was, throwing 100 miles an hour to his like high school catcher. And it also, of course, reminded me of Major League when Charlie Sheen's character, Rick Vaughn, is at spring training, and there's 2 guys standing on the sides of Jake Taylor as the catcher, and Rick throws one that is way off target and like breaks the batting practice sign, and the guy's trying to gun behind it, and he's like, what was that? Oh wait, I forget. For whatever reason, he goes, sounded like a strike, although I guess it was thrown way far away. I guess that doesn't make, maybe I'm conflating two different things. But when they said sounded like a strike, reminded me of Rick Vaughn throwing, 98 miles an hour in Major League. All those like hard throwing, rookie of the year, all those hard throwing like ringer people. Not that Rick Vaughn was a ringer. He was a felon, but
You just needed glasses.
yeah, exactly. But I have seen so many baseball movies and over again. Of course, I can't remember what sounded like a strike came from, or what part of Major League it came from. But there were a lot of like things that just reminded me of good baseball movies. And you're right, Jack Warden, I thought did a great job. I mean, you reminded me of Lou Brown, who's the manager of in Major League, just this disgruntled sort of like, I have this trash team that is not going to get any better. Ownership clearly didn't seem to care much about
the
it.
heater.
Yeah, exactly. Ownership didn't seem to care much about the team. So it was just these guys just toiling on the field, and the poor players. It was just funny. And so, of course, this hit a little bit close to home, because when they first show the stadium, there's ivy on the walls. I'm like, is this a version of Wrigley Field that I never knew existed? So I did look this up. It is Wrigley Field, but it's Wrigley Field, a minor league stadium in LA where the Angels used to play, that their minor league team used to play in Wrigley Field in LA, which is supposed to be like sort of a recreation or recreation of Wrigley Field. So I was like, this
Good
episode
catch.
was tried to be written for me. Well, I did have to look that up, but when I saw the ivy, I was like, I'm like, there's no way that I would not recognize, and they didn't have the big scoreboard. I'm like, there's no way there was a Wrigley Field of this version that I wouldn't have known immediately, but it was this minor league stadium that's supposed to be like Wrigley Field, is where they filmed it.
It's probably worth noting too, because we've talked about baseball movies in several other episodes, that we know Serling was fascinated with baseball as well.
Yeah, very
and
true.
Actually, did that radio play that they just rebroadcast or performed, whatever. I know you've moved on past this. I want to just go back to him misspelling robot for a second. Robot. Just to throw out a reference as we do. In one of the early seasons of The Simpsons, there's a part, and I don't remember which episode it is, where Homer is like dancing around and goes, I am so smart. SMRT. And like he's setting the curtains on fire in the back, behind him unknowingly or something. In the commentary on the DVD of that episode, they actually said something I thought was fascinating, which is that was not scripted, and that Dan Castellaneta, when he starts performing Homer, literally becomes dumb and starts doing dumb things like that are not planned and that he's not intentionally doing. And that was just like,
at least that's the story.
That was just him being Homer.
That's the story that he told everyone. At least he's like, yeah, no, I didn't intentionally do that.
I love that really getting character. One other great Mick Gary line from later is when they're talking about this was so horrible, the whole part about him having a heart. And it's really weird that nobody seems to care or be amazed that there's a robot who looks completely human and has been playing in the major leagues. They're only concerned with is he allowed to play? Like they just even if you were the commissioner of baseball, yes, you will have to make that decision. Even today in 2020, much less 60 years ago, and this is set in the past then, so let's say 100 years ago, wouldn't you have been like, wait, that thing's a robot? It looks like a person. Like you'd be amazed. And they're like, nope, it says right here in the rules, they must be a human. But during that conversation, they end up deciding that the defining characteristic apparently is having a heart, which we should get back to. But McGarry's line talking about the GM, he says, well, Beasley doesn't have a heart either, and he owns 40% of the club.
Exactly. I think this was a funny episode. I have also some more baseball themes to talk about, but let's take a break quick right now, and we'll come back and keep discussing the mighty Casey.
Hey everybody, if you haven't noticed, we are approaching the end of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, which is also going to be the end of season 1 of Deja Reviewed. But we need your help. After the last episode, we're going to do one wrap-up episode for this season, which will be the season finale of Deja Reviewed. And we're going to be talking about everything we talked about this whole season, about the Twilight Zone, what was good, what was bad, how it holds up, how it doesn't. And we want to hear from you. So send us in, what are the episodes that we got wrong? Is there some episode that you love that we underrated? Is there an episode you hated that we overrated? What are your top 3 episodes? What are your bottom 3 episodes? Send those to us and we will include them on air. Please do that soon because we will be recording a little bit ahead of time. So don't wait till after you hear the last episode to send us in something. If you have something to say, send it now.
And you can find where to send all that stuff on our social media. Just go to DejaReview.com. You can find links to all of our social media. You can even leave us a voicemail or shoot us a text if you just go to DejaReview.com and find all that information. We're hoping to hear from you before the finale. Okay, we are back, still discussing the mighty Casey. So there are some bigger things that are here, especially being a Cubs fan. I love how the manager he is fine with taking a robot on the team. And I don't know how much you follow the Cubs, but in their World Series championship team, they had a shortstop who beat up on his wife multiple times, and they had a closer who shot a gun in his garage allegedly at his girlfriend, or did whatever. And now he has COVID, so screw him. The fate came and got him. But these sort of hired guns make it kind of hard to root for your team. I remember even in like 2008, I think it was, they got a longtime Cardinal onto the team, and every Cub fan despised him as a Cardinal, but he actually played really well as a Cub, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, this is fine, we're fine with him now. Gary Gaetti in 1998 was a despised member of the Cardinals, and then he comes over to the Cubs and we're like, oh, as long as they perform, we're good with them. So this guy who's a robot, they're like, oh, we're fine as long as he's good. And that was the same,
he's our robot.
Yeah. And really, I was disgusted with how the Cubs treated Addison Russell, was their shortstop, who was a domestic abuser. I was disgusted that the Cubs kept him on for as long as they did, and they really only cut him free when it was clear that he wasn't as good of a player anymore. And that was, of course, and don't get me started on Cubs management because they are disgusting people, but that was basically the tipping point. It's like, well, kind of as long as you're performing, we're going to ignore the domestic abuse. We're going to ignore all these major issues, which I think is a major problem for all the major sports. Like, a lot of things can be ignored when these players are still performing, but God forbid your performance starts to slip, then we're going to be all holier than thou and sanctimonious and be like, oh, we're taking these steps because of the terrible person this person is, instead of saying, look, they're not good anymore, so now we can use this as a bullshit excuse to cut this player.
Right. Well, the real test is going to be if, and you might know if there is some example. I can't think of one of where some professional sports team, baseball, football, basketball, hockey, whatever, cuts a star, it's still in their prime for something they did. Because the fact is, you're totally right. And it also applies to, I don't follow baseball as much. I follow the NFL more. And, it's very clear there's a 2-tier system. The guy who's number 52 on your roster gets, caught with a gun in his car or something. They're like, oh, we're cutting him. We don't want that kind of character problem. If your star quarterback gets caught with the same thing, they're like, well, hey, you shouldn't do that.
Right.
Okay. Nothing's going to happen. And you're absolutely right. If it's somebody's performance has slipped, or they're a player who's not as crucial and more easily replaceable, you're sort of bottom of the roster churn. Yes, we're happy to make an example of that.
Interesting that you threw out the number. Interesting you threw out the number 52 there, because I believe Ray Lewis was number 52, and the Ravens did nothing when he was complicit in murder. I'm trying to think of the actual examples. I mean, Aaron Hernandez, I think, did not get cut until he was clearly terrible, even though he was a straight up murderer. Plaxico Burress,
I think with Hernandez, it was like when he actually got like charged with murder and was like
That's
going to
true.
jail. They're like, okay, well, you can't play, so we're cutting you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to, we could go back to just straight up, Ty Cobb, like guys like that were just straight up racist in a straight up racist time. You could start to talk about guys like that were absolutely, Pete Rose was a complete scumbag apparently when he was playing. There are definitely bad dudes that are allowed to continue to play because they're good players. And you're right. I don't, for sure, if it was Tom Brady that got caught doing the same thing as Aaron Hernandez, they would, to their dying breath, try and keep him on that roster. So you're 100% right. It's all about the almighty dollar.
Going back to the sort of hired guns thing. I don't remember if we ever mentioned this on this podcast, but the movie Basketball, which was the one starring Trey Parker and Matt Stone of South Park fame, but not written or directed by them. I think it's like the only thing they actually were legitimately just actors in. The movie's very so-so. It has some funny moments. I liked it a lot in college. It's actually very much like the Mighty Casey and some of the silliness of it.
Yeah.
But the opening of it, I don't know if you remember this, is brilliant. It's like this sort of pseudo fake short documentary about how professional sports like lost their touch, and it's all the the teams moving and the players, and there's this great obviously it's fake, but in the documentary, like a shot of somebody at a press conference like, well, I'm so happy to be playing for, and he like doesn't even know what team he's on there. Right. Like, wait, what team is this again?
That's right.
And lines about the teams moving, and there's something about like the Jazz moved from New Orleans to Utah where jazz is prohibited, and some like it's fantastic and really captures this idea of like, yes, people get very attached to their sports teams and feel this connection, and it's a giant business, and for the players and the team ownership, like that's what it's it's about, the money and what they're going to do, and they don't care about the they're not you might be a lifelong Cubs fan, the Cubs are not your team, you have no control over them. I will give a shout out, not discounting any of the other stuff about the chase for the dollar, but the one team that can never move is my Green Bay Packers.
Yeah. Good.
Mike.
We're very happy that they can stay wherever the fuck they are. Mark, going back to that point, though, that's the classic Seinfeld bit that anyone that is a sports fan is rooting for laundry. Like the examples I just gave of these mercenaries coming in and playing, like I literally hated that one guy when he was, 300, 400 miles away in St. Louis, and then he comes up to Chicago. I'm like, oh, great. He's great now. So, but Seinfeld does that classic bit about how we're just rooting for the laundry because it doesn't matter who's really in it. Like we're just rooting for the uniforms to go out and be successful. I do.
Which is true. And like, even if everyone stayed with the same team forever, like if you've been a fan of that team for 20 years, none of the players from 20 years ago are very still true. On it. Like, the Cubs, and I'm not arguing you shouldn't be a fan of sports. Like I'm a sports fan. I have the teams I root for. But yes, like that player that you didn't like last year because they were wreaking hell on your team and now they're on your team, now you root for them. Like that's part of being a sports fan. You just have to sort of accept it and own it.
And since we're still talking about comedy, I do want to call out one other funny line that I took a note of. When the guy who introduces Casey, he's like, yeah, I fought in the war. The manager goes, yeah, which war? Because he's like an older guy. I thought that was a great line too. I just had to throw that out there as well.
Did you think, because he makes the phone call, they're like, you got this lefty pitcher who wants to try out, and he's like, yeah, send him in, or that's where he has the line about however many arms he has. And then he turns around and the doctor's there. This is right before that line. Did you also, like the manager, think that was going to be Casey and the like twister weird thing was going to be, it's like this old 60-year-old short guy in a suit who turns out to be a great pitcher?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I did for a brief moment. And then the manager has the same thought. I'm going to call out another current reference other than basically every baseball movie, because this one's a little bit more obscure, and I haven't read this in a very, very long time, but there's an actual book called Murder in Wrigley Field, where the Cubs get this ace that's basically going to win them the pennant or win them the World Series. And the ace gets murdered before the season or like during the season. And of course sends them into a tailspin. I don't remember a ton of details, but it was a murder mystery set around the Cubs baseball team in Wrigley Field. So if you are a Cubs fan, I'm sorry, but that is another thing that you might not have heard of that I read ages ago growing up. And I don't think it was anything great, but it wasn't.
Was it good when you read it?
Yeah, I mean, I probably read it when I was early high school, maybe, and I feel like I enjoyed it, but I probably also enjoyed it because it was about the Cubs and there wasn't a lot.
So, Mike, there are a couple, as comedic as this episode was, there are a couple, like, I guess, larger themes I'd like to bring up. But my last thing sort of about the sort of episode itself, and this is very much in keeping with, as much as this wasn't a Twilight Zone episode, this is very much in keeping with what we've seen in the Twilight Zone, where people are just nonplussed by like the weirdest things happening. I already talked about how nobody seems to notice or care that he's a robot and that we've suddenly have this advanced cybernetics. The team doctor examines him, checks him for a concussion and everything, without realizing he's a robot. And it's not until he's like about to walk out and like, oh, I guess I should take your pulse as like a final precaution, and realizes he doesn't have a pulse that he figures out. I'm like, how bad is this doctor? Like, McGarry figured it out just by like hitting Casey in the stomach, right? I like gives him a sort of tap and like, here's a clang. And I'm like, what, how thorough was this examination from the team? And going back to what we said, I was like, you could read this as a subtle jab at like, there have been players who complain that like their team doctors have the team's interest and not theirs in mind. And like, you know, are just going to try to get them out there to play, even if it's long-term detrimental to their health. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's definitely something there have been stories about, and we've heard people say it. I'm like, so the manager like basically like walked in like, hey, can you see my fingers moving? Yeah, he's good to go. Yeah. And does nothing, to the point that he doesn't even notice it's a robot.
That's the classic Friday Night Lights trope in the TV show and the book, I'm sure, and the movie, where they just give the shot to the star running back even though his knee is shredded. Also,
or in Varsity Blues, when the offensive lineman gets like knocked down.
Yeah.
How many fingers am I holding up? Yeah. Like, no, it's got to be yes or no. True or false? The man is holding up fingers. He's like, true.
But to that point too, I think, isn't it literally the first thing that, even if he missed the fact that he was a robot, wouldn't taking a pulse be the absolute first thing you do before you're giving him like a concussion protocol or something like that?
I mean, I feel like when I go into a doctor, even, you know, I went in once with like poison ivy. I'm like, I have this rash on my leg. Like, well, we better take your pulse to start. I'm like,
and your blood pressure. Totally.
Yeah. That's just like part of the package.
Before you get to that bigger theme, there's just a couple extra specifics that I do also want to call out then too. I loved the guy at the slow ball or the curve ball. It reminded me of the Bugs Bunny cartoon where he swings like multiple times before the ball actually crosses the plate.
I really thought the umpire was going to say that's strike 1 and 2.
Yes, which I thought was hilarious. Also, the baseball purist in me loved the fact that the robot was shaking off signs like into the, like, if I'm the catcher, I'm like, just throw the fucking fastball. But the robot's sitting there shaking off signs, so he like actually had some sort of agency to himself. The robot,
I noticed that as well, and that actually was one that like took me out. Like, I didn't find it comedic. I was like, wait, he was a robot who like barely seemed to even understand what baseball was.
Yes.
And now he's like game 1, like shaking off the sign. Like, this doesn't even fit this weird nonsensical world you've created.
Yeah, he doesn't. And he also, I'm sure he doesn't know the hitters. Like, that's the point of shaking off signs. You know, you can get him with a certain pitch. The robot himself reminded me, there was this guy, I think they called him Big Train or the Train. This guy, Walter Johnson, pitched, I think, mostly for the Nationals way back in the day. I'm pretty sure he was a lefty, but he was apparently a guy that could throw. Maybe he was a robot because he was a guy that could throw, like, you know, they didn't have radar guns back in the day, or back for baseball when he was doing this, but was apparently like this level of unhittable, where he was probably throwing 100 miles an hour and there's this big tall dude. So the whole time I was watching this, it reminded me of Walter Johnson, the just mowing through batters like this and basically being unhittable. And then I also did like 2 other things. I loved that they brought out the win one for the Gipper speech. in the
Yes.
in the locker room, between innings or whatever, before the game or whatever it was. Yeah, before the game. But then the manager turns around and he's like, oh hey Casey, and then like double takes. He's like, Casey, because he's like, we can win it without Casey.
But it's actually even more than that, because he like turns around, I was like, hey Casey, and then turns around, continues giving
exactly.
the speech. It was the total cartoon thing.
Yes.
And then like it's like 30 seconds later, wait,
Casey?
Casey's here.
Yeah. And then my only last baseball quibble is when Casey gains his heart. No manager on the planet would leave a starting pitcher in for 14-run inning. I don't care if you had zero other options. You are not leaving a guy in for 14 to give up 14 runs in the first inning. I thought it was so funny.
And I do not follow baseball at all. And even I wrote in my notes, wait, how long is McGarry going to let him go before he pulls him? It's 14-0 in the first. And he's still pitching.
It was funny.
Is there a mercy rule? I don't know.
Not at that level. Oh, and then speaking of mercy rule, speaking of at that level, one of the other things that I did appreciate, I cannot stand like Any Given Sunday. If you're going to do a movie about the league, get the goddamn licensing and use the real teams. That's one of the things I love about Major League. Don't give me bullshit teams. And I love the fact that they actually, I mean, the Hoboken Zephyrs never existed, but the teams they played against and the teams they mentioned in the rest of the episode were all real baseball teams, Major League Baseball teams, which I definitely appreciated.
Although they probably didn't have to get the rights for those to just like mention them in passing, because they never use any of those logos or show the uniforms of the other people or anything. So that's a lot easier than like Major League, where the whole thing is set.
Stuff.
Like,
yeah,
that's fantastic. But it's all shown. Like you have to get their approval for that.
Major League basically is an advertisement for Major League Baseball, though, so they should have been happy to give them the licensing.
So we need to get off baseball at some point on this episode, but I have one more baseball question for you, because it's something that I thought was weird, but I don't know if it's historically accurate or not. The whole idea of this at the beginning is that they're having their open tryouts and anyone can kind of come audition for the Hoboken Zephyrs.
You're such a director.
Who are not, I don't even know, tryout. Who are like apparently in the world of this film, like they're a real team. They're part of the National League. This is Major League. This is not like there's some, club team or low-level minor affiliate or something. Was that ever, or maybe still is, a real thing? Because it just felt weird to me. And it felt weird when the GM says that, the players showing up at the open tryouts are bad because the team is so bad. And I was like, wait, so like there's good players not signed with a team, or like, well, I'm not going to try out for the Zephyrs. They're terrible. I'll only try out with this other team. And that just was weird to me, but I don't know. So I was curious what the history is. They
certainly can. I don't know exactly if they have their own standards, but I do know that because I almost went to it. I think that there's like age cutoff. I could be totally wrong on this, but I was talking to a buddy about this probably 15 years ago. There was like an age cutoff. They do occasionally do open tryouts. That is for sure the longest of long shots. That's like that Philadelphia Eagles movie with Mark Wahlberg they're based on the true story when the Eagles were so bad. Unbreakable.
God, what was that?
Invincible?
Invincible.
Yeah.
Yes, because his name was Vince.
Yes. So that definitely, I don't know if anyone's ever actually made the team, because the more that Major League Baseball grows, the more they have farm systems all over the world. And like they're finding those. If anyone would be good enough to actually make the club, they would have been found most likely by now. But unless my buddy was lying to me, the Cubs did have an open tryout, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, that I could have technically gone to Wrigley Field, I suppose, and taken some grounders and hit some fungos and done that.
Well, the one in Invincible, and I don't know the true story. I'm only going off the movie. So if any of this is wrong, it's totally possible.
It's Hollywood's fault.
Accurate. But in the movie, it was like they were essentially doing it as a publicity thing, like a marketing thing, not with the expectation they'd actually find a useful player. What I was wondering, though, is, again, I know the NFL better than I know Major League Baseball. And in the NFL, certainly when you get back to the early 20th century, like scouting was not what it was, and there were definitely players who like did not get scouted and would have slipped through the cracks. And they even talk about in like the early years of the draft, like a team would be drafting somebody and no other teams in the league had even heard of this person. So maybe it's more believable then. Certainly those people trying out did not look like they had any business. And baseball is not the most athletic. You don't need to be the fittest of athlete to play that compared to some other sports. But those people did not like they were going to make it like trying to run around the bases.
Yeah. I actually did look this up while you were talking. So, and I'm glad to confirm that I was right. So they did have up until 2015, minor league baseball scouting bureau would hold some open tryouts at 3 levels.
Okay.
So, but since 2015, they have not done that, or they don't do that, but you technically could have. And the guy makes the point in this article that realistically, if you are good enough to play, either a college is going to pick up on you and you're going to go through that system. And baseball's rare. Not a lot of them go to college anyhow, but you're going to be known about if you're good enough to make the team, someone's going to have known about you by then and you're going to get scouted probably individually. But it was not impossible. It was not impossible up to 2015.
Well, I guess the rookie, which we've talked about before, like that is a sort of open try. But
Yeah,
the
that's
difference
true.
to this for me was they're at the stadium with the teams. Like this isn't some scout out in the middle of nowhere, like letting people
Yeah,
try out. It's
very
like
true.
at the stadium
Very
with
true.
the manager and GM.
Yeah, because people would managers, Joe Madden was basically a rock star. So people would have done that, gone just to go meet Joe Madden, probably, if that was the case. So,
All right. Well, let's get us off of baseball and
Okay.
talk at least a little bit about some broader themes. Look, I mean, this episode was comedic, but to the degree there's some, larger sci-fi theme to it, the idea of sort of humanoid robots and what makes someone human. I think the tack that this show took was, to be blunt, pretty stupid, and like there's no big discussion. They just sort of arbitrarily like, well, I guess if you have a heart, okay, heart, that makes you human, done. And there's not really any questioning of that. It's literally just like, well, tell us what the rule is. He needs to be human so that he can play for us, and we'll throw a heart in him and make it work. They don't explain where the doctor got the heart, so I was feeling a little Frankenstein-y, like maybe he went and got the heart of somebody who had a heart attack and he's going to keel over. I don't know. But there's an interesting larger question about like, what does it mean to be human? And we talked about this some with The Lonely, with Jack Walden, with the sex bot, and like, okay, at what point does that become should that be treated as a human? We think of Ex Machina recently, which is a really fantastic analysis of this. I could even throw out The Matrix, which I know is on your favorite movies list. But where the AIs have their own agency, and in the sequels, which are not as good as the first one, there is some discussion there is some acknowledgement that like, yes, they are individual entities with some with agency, and the humans kind of actually negotiate with them. They're not necessarily considered human, but they're not just like machine servants anymore. They're considered there's the whole Terminator series, particularly the second one where Arnold kind of becomes a father figure to
Edward Furlong.
John Connor, Edward Furlong. But I don't know if you saw the most recent one, Dark Fate.
No.
I wouldn't recommend it, but I caught it late at night at some point, and it had a couple interesting things about it, even if the movie as a whole didn't work. And one of the really fascinating ones was in it. So I guess this is a spoiler for the movie, but there is a Terminator played by Arnold, as there is in all of them, who completes the mission, whatever his mission was, and I won't spoil what his mission was supposed to do, but he was sent back in time and
It's
accomplishes
either
his
save
mission.
John Connor or kill John Connors.
Right. One of the two. It's the latter. He kills John Connor. Spoiler. I did give a spoiler warning. And that happens like right at the beginning of the movie. It's I guess if you're going to see the movie, it wouldn't be a spoiler 5 minutes in. But then there's this interesting question of, okay, he's this Terminator. His mission was kill John Connor. He does it. He still has essentially like infinite life left. Like what does he do? And it actually does raise this interesting question of like how the Terminator then chooses to spend his time now that he can do whatever he wants. He doesn't have a mission protocol to follow.
I'm just picturing him running through a field of daisies while something tells me I'm into something good is playing.
Well, there's that was one of the better aspects of that movie, and then the relationship between him and Linda Hamilton, who was fantastic as she always is in the Terminator films, and is back and like, look, she has this association of like, okay, there was one guy who looked like you who was trying to kill me. Then there was another one who was protecting John. Now there's another one that looks like you, and you are actually the one that killed my son. Like, they have a very weird relationship. But he talks about like trying to understand what it means to be human. Like he's a learning machine. Like, okay, my mission is accomplished. What do I do? Well, I'm surrounded by humans. I'm supposed to blend in. I'm going to try to understand what it is to be human. And he ends up like having a family.
Oh my God.
Not like, no, he doesn't like have a kid, but he sort of becomes a surrogate dad pairing up with this family, but like helping take care of the kid and stuff. And it's an interesting question. And so this episode raises it in a much less interesting way. And I've been babbling, so I want to hear what you think about this. But the idea of like, what does it mean to be human? And at what point, if we have robots that start to behave more and more like humans, at what point do they cease being sort of objects that we can control? Which of course this episode was not interesting enough to raise, but like they basically treat Casey as a slave or prop to them. Yeah. It's like, he needs to play baseball. All right, we're going to put a heart in him so he can keep playing baseball. Like, they just tell him what to do and he does it. He doesn't really have agency. And that I think is a really provocative question that a lot of better sci-fi than this episode has dealt with, but certainly something raised here.
Well, and that's going back to The Lonely, because that was the exact, and that was the struggle that Jack Warden had, which he obviously did not have in this, because Casey was helping him win a pennant. So I can't believe you went through all of that and did not mention Battlestar Galactica, which we talked about multiple times on taking a look at Deja Review.
I didn't, because we talk about it.
Yeah, but I think I truly think,
no, that's like probably the best example.
Yeah, exactly. I think the reboot took the most detailed look at this. Like, what's the difference of our skin and our flesh being made up of mostly carbon versus being made up of mostly silicon or whatever? What's the difference? They're just atoms. Like, it's just chemical reactions that happen in our brain. They're super sophisticated, like the organic, what we consider life. And frankly, this is super topical now because scientists still don't know how to classify viruses, because they do a lot of things that are what we attribute to living things, but they're not really living things, or they are. Like, so it's a super difficult question. Like, we're all just chemicals. Like, everything that's just made up of chemicals. And of course the chemicals, we can form solids and do all that stuff. But ultimately, we have that elemental chart. Everything we know about is made up of all this stuff. This is just the ingredients to make up different recipes. And it's crazy how, like, thinking about like computers, like, do we consider a strand of our DNA a computer? Because it's doing the exact same function as like a computer would be doing. I say simplistic level, but frankly, it only kind of runs one function in a very elegant way. It's a super interesting question. I think the only solution is the Battlestar solution, where they get intelligent enough that they jog off for a couple millennia and then come back and try and kill us all. So, although I will say this,
as Casey was going to do if we see a follow-up to this.
I will say this, based on how stupid my Roomba is, I am not worried that we're anywhere near the event horizon or whatever of the robot uprising or the robot apocalypse. There are definitely questions of, AI being able to teach AI. I think when we get to that level, that's when we just throw the big switch and are like, all right, shut it down. But I don't see that happening before we destroy the planet and kill everyone on it anyhow. So,
well, that's encouraging. The Battlestar Galactica thing, I think one of the really provocative ways that addresses that is the idea of some of these Cylons who don't even know they're Cylons.
Right.
Like, they think they're human, they act like human, they have agency and make their own decisions. Sometimes they're going against what their programming is.
Yeah.
You know, and so at what point, you know, I guess from a biological standpoint, you could say like, okay, are you human? Meaning like, are you biologically the same way we would say like, well, a tiger and a lion are different, like because they are physically different animals. Okay. But if you talk about the sort of more philosophical thing of humanity, and do you have the rights of a human? Do you have, you know, should we treat you the same way? That becomes a lot tougher. You know, and at some point it has to come down to like, do you have some of your own agency and your own conception of self? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Just to jump in again. So we're sort of starting to see the first litigation start to come in with self-driving cars. That's going to be something we have to actually legally define at some point. Like not in the case of self-driving cars, but it will be. Like, you're right. This thing is not a human, but is this a species? Like, do they do all the same things that we attribute to life? Do they reproduce? Do they intake energy and put out waste? Like, do they do all the same things that we consider biological life? And if they do, then don't we, and especially if they're intelligent, don't we have to kind of honor that? I'm starting to have a big moral conflict about eating chicken because chickens can count to like 10 now. And I'm like, how smart does a chicken have to get before I am uncomfortable eating a chicken or a pig? Like those things.
Did you see this? I think it was in this past season before they went remote of SNL. It was Kate McKinnon and Aidy Bryant did this thing on Weekend Update a couple times where they come on, you know, as like the guests on Weekend Update, and they own like some meat factory, or like they put out like meat platters as like their thing, but they're all about like, we only take the worst animals, and they're like, for each one, like this this pig was so dumb. This is what you shouldn't feel bad about eating him. And then, you know, and this chicken was a racist. You know what he did? Like, and that's the whole sketch.
Well, and so then this is perfect timing because I just listened to a podcast about the search for extraterrestrial life. And one of the things that that scientists are trying to recreate, and frankly have been trying to recreate since we postulated on the Big Bang Theory, is can we create the correct lab conditions to create life? I mean, it's Frankenstein. That's essentially what we're trying to do. And the guy that was doing this search, was talking to some scientists that are trying to do this, and he was telling the scientists, you gotta be able to prove this because this will validate my search for it. And they're like, no, you have to search for it and find it so it validates our research on being able to create this. And so, but the idea was, okay, well, if we took, and I know that it's been too long since I actually read about the experiments where they actually were able to create organic molecules, but I'm almost positive that's been come and gone a long time ago, where they were at least able to form like organic chains. Yeah. By recreating, you know, the right conditions or close to the right conditions. So, I mean, if we can do that in a lab, like what's the difference of the universe just being this giant lab? I mean, literally the lab that we're doing these experiments is made out of the universe, and the stardust that we originally were is our theory, of course. But so, yeah, I mean, like I think you have to consider that life, like whether or not they feel pain, whether or not they have souls, or which is the biggest bullshit thing to ever put into anything, but whether we ever get to that point where they are independent and like would survive without us and be able to do all these things without us, I think you have created life, even if it is inorganic, quote unquote.
You know, you raised a whole bunch of stuff there. Extraterrestrial life, creating our own life, and things like that. The self-driving cars thing, when you talked about the litigation, I think one of the interesting things where that probably is one of the first places this is going to come up is the first time a self-driving car like hits and kills somebody. right? Like, okay, so who's responsible? Is it the car? Is it its own entity? Is
Right.
it the owner or driver
Is
of
it
the car who wasn't actually driving it?
Elon
Is it the
Musk?
company who
Yeah.
made the car? And right now those cars are essentially single function, and obviously a car is a very complex thing, but like it's not a fully designed AI designed to be like its own life. It's AI that can drive, and that's kind of all it does. But what if you had a robot to the level of, hypothetically, let's say like a Terminator level robot driving a car, and it hits somebody and decides to succumb to the judicial system because it doesn't, its mission is done or whatever.
I like this episode.
Well, like, right, that would be a good Twilight Zone. But like, okay, do we hold it responsible? Like, it was made by somebody, it's following its programming. Do we hold the programmer responsible for putting in this glitch that let it hit somebody when it wasn't supposed to? I don't know.
So one of the, just to that point, one of the things
Yeah.
that they talked about when they were talking about these and this guy was a car expert. It was on Factually. The guy was a car expert, and he was talking about how maybe it's the point of reasoning. Maybe that's what we consider, life worth protecting, because he was like, you can program all this stuff into a car. He's like, but you cannot account for us, for pedestrians just stepping off you can to an extent. He's like, but there are decisions. That's the classic torts law school problem we always had to deal with. If you were driving towards, your car's out of control and you can only hit one kid, or you can only hit this other kid, hit the one that's not wearing glasses because they're probably the dumber kid, and like save yourself the liability. Like those things, or save yourself some liability. Those are the kinds of decisions that we have theoretically, uniquely as human beings, that are the most difficult things to be able to replicate, because you can't have an infinite number of potential situations that you can program a computer for. And how do you teach someone reason? How do you program reason into something?
So first off, I love this hypothetical where you have enough time as you're driving this car to sit there and think like, okay, this kid does have glasses, this doesn't. Which way should I aim the car to hit him? But you don't have enough time to stop the car.
Don't defeat the hypothetical. That's my law school professors would say.
I want to bring up something that reminded me of that I thought was fascinating. There's Nate Silver who runs 538. He has a book called The Signal and the Noise that is fantastic. I would highly recommend it. You will understand a lot of things in a much better way than you do. Like I think universally say that to everyone. Especially if you're bad at math, you will understand better because you'll at least he's good at putting things conceptually. But one of the points he makes that tied into here was talking about I want to say it was Gary Kasparov. I might be wrong on that detail, but it was one of these grandmaster chess players who was having the big highly publicized chess match against one of the first like
Deep Thought
supercomputer
or Deep Blue
chess
or
things.
whatever.
I think it was Deep Blue.
Yeah.
He was playing.
Deep Thought was Hitchhiker's
Okay, so the
Guide.
detail might be wrong, but it was a grandmaster, possibly Gary Kasparov, playing against one of IBM's like super powered chess playing computers. And of course, those computers are not generalized AI. They're basically designed to play chess really well, and that's all they can do. And essentially, the advantage that the machine has there is it can go through a whole bunch of possibilities and down a whole bunch of trees much faster than a human can. The advantage the human has is, as you said, the reason to be thinking like, okay, not all these paths are equally accurate. I don't need to go down these, and it's more likely this will happen. And there's some interesting discussion in the book of the matches, and like one of the things Gary Kasparov does is like very early on, just like makes this move
That's
he's
absurd.
never made before in tournament play, and so suddenly the whole database that the computer is drawing off is like, it literally has 2 other examples of anyone ever making that move, so it can't draw on it. But then there's this moment you talk about where they're kind of near the end game, and the computer's like taking a while to like make its moves. You get however much time in professional chess, and makes this move, and so what it turns out was there was like a bug somewhere in the code, and the programmers like caught it and fixed it for the next match, that like if it got in a loop and couldn't decide on the right move, it basically does like a random move.
Oh.
I'm oversimplifying, but essentially that.
Yeah.
But Gary Kasparov, like it completely threw him for the rest of the series because he saw that and he said, "Oh my God, I can't understand why it would make this move. It's thinking
It's
so many levels
rationalizing, yeah.
deeper than I am that there's no way I can," and basically just like lost all his confidence based off this bug.
But again, it's the programming or the bug that caused. So Gary did the thing to the robot early on that then the robot did to him, essentially, inadvertently or advertently. But that wasn't like it wasn't like the robot like picked up on the cue that, oh, he threw out this crazy move. Like a human player might be like, well, dang, I'm going to do the same thing to him later on in this match. Like, I'm going to put this in my back pocket and I'm going to throw. So maybe it's reason.
No, the mistake Kasparov made was what we're talking about was ascribing agency and like,
exactly.
It like thought of something that I couldn't have. And it turned out it was just a mistake. And in Silver's book about signal and noise, his point is he thought it was signal, like an important thing. And it really was just noise. It was background accident sort of thing that you shouldn't read anything into.
Well, speaking of signal and noise,
highly recommend that book.
Was signal and noise. We are once again almost at an hour of an episode we didn't particularly love. So what do you say?
Okay, so well, we talked a lot about baseball and a lot about robots. Can I give one last reference that actually specifically ties to this episode? It's perception.
Yeah.
One of the things that really bugged me with the way that this episode treated this idea of like how the robot would act, and now it gets a heart and it likes everybody, so it can't strike anyone out because it doesn't want them to feel bad. And I was like, but that even within this world, that's so oversimplified because by letting all these other people get hits, he's making his own teammates feel bad, and he's probably going to cost the manager his job. And there's, of course, in this episode, no thought or anything given to that. Casey's still perfectly happy at the end, and I love his little, I'm just going to go out and be a social worker and help people.
That's a good point. For every winner in baseball, there's a loser on the exact other side of the ball.
Right. And what it reminded me of is the famous Isaac Asimov book, I, Robot, which was made into a movie that has very little to do with the book.
Yes.
Basically everything since then that you've ever read or seen, for listeners who don't know this, that deals with robots or AI is basically drawing on Asimov, and he's the one who creates the sort of three rules of robotics and stuff. There's one story in that book, which is essentially, it's a collection of short stories all about robots, sort of loosely tied together by one character who shows up in all of them. In one of the stories, they basically get a robot to kind of like self-destruct, like its brain implodes, by putting it in exactly this situation where it either has to hurt one person or another. Like there's no out, and whatever he does, somebody's going to get hurt, and it's like brain can't process figuring out, how do I get out of this, because somebody's going to be a loser
because I can't violate
here.
The first rule of robotics or whatever.
Exactly, which you may not harm a human. And that's probably much deeper than you could have gone in the 3 minutes they had remaining when that happened here. But to totally sidestep that and just like, no, I'm going to let everybody get hit. Like, I'm like, you're not even going to give passing mention to this big obvious thing that everyone on your team is now really sad and upset.
And I think because of the fact that this essentially was a comedy, it wasn't Twilight Zone. There wasn't a really bigger thought experiment into this too. Maybe Serling just wanted to go take some swings on the field at Wrigley Field in Los Angeles. Like this, I don't know. He probably had the cachet at this point to be able to do it. So it was silly, but I didn't hate it.
And they did do a nice job kind of cutting between what I assume was stock footage of like full crowds at baseball games, and then like the on-field action with their actors. And I thought they found nice things matched up well. They've gotten better at using stock footage over this first season. Some of the early episodes really screwed that up.
Although if they were as bad, I guess that some of the crowds were coming when Casey was actually pitching. Should we close this out, Mark?
Yeah.
So
then one episode left to go.
Yeah. Here's our closing narration. Once upon a time, there was a Major League Baseball team called the Hoboken Zephyrs, who, during the last year of their existence, wound up in last place, and shortly thereafter wound up in oblivion. There's a rumor, unsubstantiated, of course, that a manager named McGarry took them to the West Coast and wound up with several pennants and a couple of world championships. This team had a pitching staff that made history. Of course, none of them smiled very much, but it happens to be a fact that they pitched like nothing human. And if you're interested as to where these gentlemen came from, you might check under B for baseball in the Twilight Zone.
So just to be clear, this says that this team won a couple of world championships, but that's a rumor and they can't substantiate it. Aren't there records of who won the world championships?
Yes, there are.
Okay, just checking.
I think so. No, yes, of course
I would
there
assume
are.
so.
Yes. So that reminded me a little bit of The Natural, which was, he came out of nowhere, was this amazing stud star, and then disappeared. And they said that he was kind of barnstorming around different places, and then he'd pop up in all these different places as Roy Hobbs. So that was kind of what I thought, what I had thought of that when they said that, when they did that thing.
There was a nice last shot setting that up where it's like a wide shot from like above the stadium, kind of looking down on the field, and you see McGarry chasing after the scientist who built the robot with the blueprints, like pointing stuff off to him, and they like walk off into the sunset together.
Yeah.
Apparently to go build. I also thought it was weird that this scientist like has figured out like not just how to build a robot, and not just how to build a robot and cover it with skin and stuff so that it looks human and can pass as human, and not just how to like make it understand a complex game like baseball and also be able to pitch and stuff. Does all these giant breakthroughs, and this is the best he can come up with, is like, I guess I'll make him a pitcher for a crappy team. Like, surely like you could be doing something better with those talent, like, or even do something worse, sort of morally, but more lucrative, like build soldiers for the army. Like, there's so many things you could do, and this is like the most bizarre thing to choose to do with that if you could.
So one other kind of point I did want to make. So around this time is when they talk about them going to the West Coast. I didn't know if this was Serling kind of winking at the audience and being like, because I guess this would have been in 1960, so we wouldn't have known this. I was just thinking about the teams that got good in this, like the Dodgers were a really good West Coast team in the 60s, largely because they had a basically unhittable pitching staff. So, but that would have been post this. I wonder
made up of robots.
Yeah.
Maybe the Dodgers got the idea from this and like, hey, let's build us some robots.
And to be honest, the 1950s are sort of a blind spot for me when it comes to baseball, but maybe I was wondering if he was trying to make a joke about a specific team being made up of amazing pitchers on the West Coast. But I didn't.
If he was, it went right over my head because I don't follow baseball. Mike, I don't know. Usually you talk about the writers and directors, and I don't remember if you mentioned that at the beginning of this. I just thought it was interesting. This is, I think, the first episode we've had co-directed by Robert Parrish and Alvin Ganzer. And I would have to do some homework on this, but I would assume that was unusual. It's really the idea of co-directors is to my understanding, as a sort of commonplace, is relatively recent. You didn't see it much. You still don't see it a ton, but I don't remember many instances prior to like the 90s. And the few cases where it's usually relatives, like the Coen brothers or the Wachowskis, or, and I just thought that was really interesting. And I was curious what the backstory was on that, because those are both people who have individually directed Twilight Zone episodes we've seen. I was wondering if they actually co-directed like the whole episode, or if it was like a Justice League scenario more recently where one of them was directing, had to leave halfway through the shoot for some reason, and they brought the other one on to finish it. I don't know the answer. I just thought that jumped out at me because that seemed very unusual for the time. I
just wanted to finish up this thought because the more I'm thinking about it, the more I think that Serling was referencing the Dodgers, because if you recall, the Dodgers in the 50s, late 50s, I think, they were a Brooklyn team, which this was the Hoboken. Right. They were obviously an East Coast team, moved out to the West Coast. And I'm just looking up. So they made 5 World Series in the 50s, including winning the 1959 World Series. They won 2 of those 5, lost 3 World Series in the 50s. The one that they won, there was their second year as the Los Angeles Dodgers, and then went on to win. Obviously, Serling wouldn't know this, but went on to win a bunch in the 60s. So I all but guarantee that Serling was intentionally making a Dodgers reference. I don't know if they were Smilers or not Smilers, but they had Koufax at this time. They had Drysdale, Johnny Padres. They had a stud pitching staff, which is kind of the strength of the team at the time. So I all but guarantee.
So to those conspiracy theorists out there, let's get this going viral that the 50s, 60s Dodgers were in fact
the Hoboken
made of
Zephyrs. Yeah, and they were robots, yes. So, okay.
All right.
So should we rate the sweat?
You know, for an episode about sports, I understand that Casey may not have had sweat glands built in because he was a robot, but I would think you would have seen more sweating. There was that one guy doing the calisthenics who was really sweaty, like about to pass out and die.
I forgot to mention this. The guy, you mean the guy who didn't know how to do jumping jacks? Like, I had to go back and watch it 2 or 3 different times. He didn't know how to do jumping jacks. It was hilarious.
I didn't read it as that. I read it as he was like so out of shape or so unathletic, like he literally couldn't like accomplish the act of a jumping jack.
No, but he locked it in. I swear to God, the extra did not know how to do a jumping jack. Like, it was like the old patting your head and rubbing your belly. That's what it looked like he was trying to do at the beginning. And finally he's like, oh, my arms go up when my legs go out. And he locked it in toward the end of it. But it's hilarious watching him do jumping jacks. Yeah, no, there wasn't.
So he was the only one I really noticed being sweaty, but he was drenched. So maybe I'll give it like a 3. He was a minor character, but he was drenched.
It's okay. I had a 4. Let's say 3. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and then do you want to talk me down? I don't think you're going to have to talk me down that much.
Why don't you start? We'll see where you're at, and I'll see where I want to talk you to.
I mean, I looked back at some of our other ratings, and I want to say like a 2. Like, I don't think that this is an aggressively bad episode, and I don't want to... So, like, do you want to just... Well, where do you come in first?
So I don't think this was a 1, because the ones to me are those episodes where like the production is terrible, the story is terrible, it's uninteresting. There was some good comedy in here. Like,
yes,
there were sections of this that were genuinely entertaining, just not necessarily as a Twilight Zone. And the production is not bad. Like, they did a nice job with the shooting, particularly, out on location in the stadium, and got some nice shots there. So I don't want to go that far. I will say one of the things that we have, and I know we don't have to be 100% consistent in this.
Oh God, because if we did, we'd be in big trouble.
Well, but sometimes we've talked about like how much this felt like a Twilight Zone. I would say this is of the entire first season. I'd have to go back and look at the list to see if it's the absolute least, but it's definitely in the bottom like 2 of feeling like a Twilight Zone.
I would say the only other one would be
for that.
A Big Tall Wish would probably be the only other one that's probably close to this as un-Twilight Zone-ish. Maybe the Chaser had weird things to it.
The Chaser actually felt pretty Twilight Zone, just bad.
Yeah.
So I'd probably come in at like a 1.5, because I really want to reserve those ones for the super cheesiest, worst ones. And I was more entertained by this than I was by The Fever or The Chaser. But it'd be really hard. I mean, tell me what some other 2s were. And my guess is that I like this less than those.
I wouldn't be surprised. So Mirror Image, which frankly I think
definitely better than this.
Yes, but I also think that we were unfairly harsh on Mirror Image, to be perfectly honest, because thinking back on that episode, I've mentioned this before, I think I liked better than we rated it. You probably talked me down from a reasonable score.
I think we were fairly harsh on Mirror Image because of the context that Serling told us to view it in.
Yes, yeah, true. A World of Difference is a 2.
Which one is that?
That's the one where the guy is an actor in his own life or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
A Nice Place to Visit. I like this episode better than A Nice Place to Visit, to be perfectly honest with you, but I don't think this should be above a 2 for sure.
Yeah, and this is one where I'm going to say I do think your love of baseball probably skews, not in a negative way. Like that's going to make your the same way anything with time travel I tend to just like probably more than I should.
So I guess 1.5.
If you want to say a 2, I would be okay with that. I think Walden was quite good as the lead. He was very entertaining, and
Warden.
this was honestly one of the more entertaining episodes
Yes.
because of the comedic parts. But when this was bad, the bad parts of this were as bad as the bad parts of any other episode.
Agreed,
we've seen.
but the good parts were better than. And again, weighed in the context of a Twilight. If we want to say, hey, this is our list of Twilight Zone episodes you should watch that are be like, oh, this is totally so what the Twilight Zone is. It's
no, this is like a 0 if that's
right.
the
Yeah,
category.
exactly. So, I mean, I guess I'd be fine with a 1.5.
I'm fine with a 1.5 or a 2.
Okay.
I think we go either way. And I think it really just depends how much we want to weight whether it's a Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I'm fine with a 1. So here's 1.5s: Escape Clause, What You Need, The Four of Us Are Dying, The Big Tall Wish, A Passage for Trumpet, and Mr. Beavis.
And this is just where it gets tough because all of those and this one have such different things wrong with them.
Yeah, true. I would rather watch this episode than any of the ones I just mentioned.
Then let's make this a 2
Okay.
because I also would rather watch this than most of those. But I would I would go with you, like, if we're doing a list of like episodes that someone who's interested in the Twilight Zone, like, oh, then you should watch this.
Yeah.
This is probably like number 34 or 35 out of 35.
Yeah,
on that
and
list.
we shouldn't have figured that out at the penultimate episode if that's the way we're ranking these. No, I agree with you. For me it's our own personal rating, and I think I'm happy. I'm completely happy with the 2. It should definitely not be higher, and I can see that it could be lower, but
I don't know if there's another episode we've done of Deja Reviewed where I feel like laughing as much about, like, there's
some great writing,
genuinely quotable lines in this.
That's why I think
All right, let's give it a 2
because it has baseball and it has comedy, which are 2 things that I really like that I think we have. Mark, are you ready to guess the last episode of season 1 of The Twilight Zone?
I am, and just for our listeners, so it's actually going to be the second to last episode of this season of Deja Reviewed, because we'll do that next week, the final episode, which I'll guess in a second, and then we're going to do one kind of wrap-up conclusion to the whole season and what we thought of the Twilight Zone season 1 overall and how it holds up.
And we'll probably
So, give me
actually
the title
also
and
be
we'll-
trying to ping you guys and get some of your thoughts on the season as a whole. Some of you that have been watching and along with us and listening along with us to kind of get some feedback from you. Maybe we'll even do polls. Who knows? We've got some time to figure that out. So,
Good point.
because we're recording this early, I guess I spoiled that. We have a little bit of time to figure that out. Okay,
We're
Mark.
recording this back in 1961. We just watched this episode.
Pork prices are up. The last episode of season.
I like that that's how you would talk in 1961.
It is. The pork prices. Where did that come
Why
from?
are you talking about pork prices?
I had pork prices on my mind instead of saying the name. What if the last episode of season 1 of The Twilight Zone was called Pork Prices Are Up? What would your guess be for that? No, we're not doing this. Okay. The last episode of season 1 of The Twilight Zone is entitled A World of His Own.
I thought you were going to say A World of Difference. I'm like, wait, didn't we watch that?
It's Long Live Walter Jameson. I'm going to make you watch it again.
World of His Own. Okay. So 2 things immediately come to my head. One would be that, like, somebody gets their kind of own, like, private world to live in, and it turns out to be hell, a la Nice Place to Visit. The other thing would be somebody who gets has some kind of mental breakdown and is, like, stuck inside their own fantasy world they've created in their head. I'm thinking of the end of the theatrical cut of Brazil, where character, like, drives off into the sunset, everything's great, and then cut to he's, like, in this chair being tortured, and it's just like his brain's completely gone. So I guess I'm going to go with the latter and say that it's something happens to somebody and they sort of create this fantasy world of their own, but the twist part will be that it's they're, like, living it out in everyday life, just seeing things differently. So they're interacting with the real world, not just in their head, but the way they see the real world is totally different.
So The Matrix. You know what? If it's either one of those, I'm going to give you a gold star because I think you could be allowed 2 guesses. Thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. Next week's episode is the final episode, episode 36 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, titled A World of His Own. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe. Or you can also find us at DejaReview.com, where you can find all of our social media. You can leave us a voicemail and a text message, and we hope that you tune in next week.
Deja Review.